And welcome back to part 3 on how I'm laying track on my layout. Now we're up to the step where we're actually going to be putting down a bead of glue, or in this case caulk, in order to attach the pieces of flex track to the roadbed. Now I like to use a little bit more than is necessary. I kind of goop it on just because I'm more concerned right now on holding the track to the roadbed than I am on it looking that great. It does dry clear. Here's an example of the finished product from track 2. And you can see here, yes, you are able to see the lines of the adhesive, but on this case, you can still, it's still pretty clear, and I'll still be able to ballast on top of that. Unfortunately, I do tend to goop enough down so that way it will bleed through the ties. Then what I do to clean it up is take my snap blade here, and if I get any on the rails, carve it off the top of the rails, carve it, whittle off any that's on the inside flange of the rails. And then if there's any that are way too deep in between the rails, take the blade and actually cut it out. While the caulk or the adhesive is still wet, I can even actually take another set of rail joiners, of railroad ties. I have some old Code 100 ones I use, and I can actually go in and scoop the adhesive out. As you're doing that, though, you have to be careful because what you're doing is you're actually scraping the adhesive onto the inner surface of this rail. So you will definitely need to come in later with your snap blade to clean them up. So nothing on track 3, these two tracks, have I cleaned up yet. The train actually does not run without bumping over numerous parts of the rails. You can see here, let me find a good example. So you can see right here, there is a little bit that has dried clear on the rails themselves. Because I chose to use caulk, which is fairly pliable, it actually just scrapes right up. So in some cases I can even just get it with my finger and I don't even need to use the knife to clean up the rails, and it just scrapes right off. The other problem is then you have to look for the areas on the inside of the rails. For instance, here's a nice big section that I have to clean up, and you can see here it does look a little discolored. So what I would do is I would take the snap blade in here and just start to cut off all the excess adhesive. It's a little tedious. What I like to do is just to what I did for track 2 is just run the train around the layout and just look for places where it bumps or look for places where it struggles. If I see a little hop, I know that's probably an area that I need to clean up a little bit. Sometimes if the smallest little bead, like there's a tiny little piece right here, can cause the train to derail, or other times it just skates over it no problem. I haven't really quite figured it out yet, but I've just been, like I said, just running the train very slowly. Start off just by running it slowly over, looks for any bumps, go a little faster, look for bumps, and any problem areas. Any time you hear the train skipping over the tracks that's not at a rail joiner, say for instance like here, that's usually an indication of an area where you have to clean up. You can see here I was very heavy-handed right here. I did try to clean some of these up with the ties or with some old Code 100 ties, but you can see here these ones got a little messy. So I can actually go in and clean those up with the blade. Okay, and as you can see here, this middle one, just this one that I cleaned up, already looks a lot better. I did not bother cleaning these other two. And you can see here the bigger chunks of the clear caulk that I had pulled out of those areas. Took about a minute to clean it up. I end up with maybe 2 or 3 of these per piece of track I have to put down. It's just kind of because of how much of a heavy hand I tend to go on the adhesive. I do like caulk because in this point it's a little bit more pliable to use than an adhesive. It's not as strong as say liquid nails. It makes it much easier to clean it up with your snap blade or with a pair of tweezers or basically anything that can even remotely cut the adhesive. Some things to keep in mind as you're cleaning up. Do not use your multimeter. These look like they'd be great for cleaning up. Don't use it, you'll mess them up. Also, do not use your jeweler's file. This is, it's a precision tool used that we use for cleaning up the edges and the tips of the rails. It's very tempting because it fits very nicely in between here. Do not use your better tools. Get some, piece of junk tools or tools that you don't mind having to clean and that really aren't precision. So now I'm going to go ahead and put down the first bead of the adhesive under the rails. and it's a bit of a messy process, so I'm going to try not to get all of the wet adhesive over my phone, so I might not be able to document this as much, and we'll see what happens. Okay, and as you can see here, very heavy-handed, very wide bead running down the length of the track. Now when you smooth this out, what you want to do is smooth away from any area that's already glued down. Because if I take it and I try to smooth the adhesive this way, what happens is I'm going to get a big puddle right here, and this section of the track is already, my crossover is already glued down. So I'm going to take, the paper towel and as best I can smooth this way away from the parts that are already completed. And same thing, I'm going to smooth away towards the free end of the track. As you can see here, I'll point with my carpenter square, I'm predicting that this piece of flex track will end right about here. Normally I'd pin it down first, but because this one is pretty straightforward, I didn't bother. So what I did is I left about 6 inches or so of unglued down track, so that way I'll have some room and some a free end to play with and get into position for the next piece of track. So now I'm going to go ahead and smooth all this out with a paper towel, and hopefully it won't all goop up in an area I can't clean it up. Okay, and as you can see here, I've smoothed out the areas a little bit on these ties here. I'm not going to worry about that for right now. I can wipe that off when I'm done, and just smooth the adhesive along the rest of the road bed. Just to go over again, I'm just using regular premium kitchen and bath adhesive sealant, or caulk, and using the ones that dry clear, and also using the one that is paintable. I think it says that on here somewhere. This is just from your local hardware store. It's pretty cheap, so that's why I'm fairly liberal with it, because I'd rather have the track secured down and clean it up a little bit if I have to, than really worry about trying to conserve my adhesive. Okay, now I'm at the point where I want to start putting in my T-pins. Normally I wouldn't T-pin a straightaway. I'd just put some weights on it, use some various blocks of wood to just press down and make sure I'm getting good adhesion between the track and the road bed. I even have some lighter weight dumbbells that then I would set on top of the old 2x3 sections of wood to just kind of create a weight. Or I have various old magazines, pieces from my old layout that I would, or these old controller stands that I would use for my old layout, which I've made way too beefy, and these would be able to hold down the rails onto the track. So at this point though, I am going to use T-pins though. I'm going to see if I can force this track in this direction towards the crossover and see if I can actually get rid of this little gap right there. Okay, and you can see here by placing these pins there, I was able to pretty much eliminate this gap here and minimize this gap right there. That seems to be about as close as I can get it. I don't want to rip up anything else, and it's, like I said, I normally don't have that issue. It's just because I did not solder these rail joiners. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is T-pin that free section of the track there, so I can show you what the fully finished piece of the flex track will look like, and then we'll get ready to lay our final ties. Okay, and here's an example of the free end being T-pinned in place. What I like to do is, I don't know if you can see this, but is put one T-pin. The T-pins themselves aren't actually pushing down on the rails at all. They're just pushing left or right. So I like to get one T-pin snug up against one side of a tie and one T-pin snug up against the opposite end. So you got this T-pin pushing the ties this way and this T-pin pushing in the opposite direction. And then just the same thing on the other side. I like to build these nice little clusters of 4. Also, if you can see here, try not to push. We have a gap in the flex track. So this T-pin is pushing this way on the edge of this, 2-for piece of this double tie right here. I don't want to put this T-pin on this side to push, because that's just gonna instead try to gap these two groupings of 2 ties apart from each other. So that's why I positioned the T-pins the way I have. You can see here the track does still want to raise up a little bit. I don't know if that's just because my layout isn't straight, or I didn't cut the rail straight, or what the case is, but that's why I've been weighting the track down with, like I said, blocks of wood and magazines and other weights. Okay, now before I continue on showing you how I insert the ties back into the rails, I did want to talk about here about snipping the rails. As you can see here, I didn't have to cut anything because I was laying pieces on a straight track. But what you would do typically is, if I bend this piece back to where I think it needs to be, you can see the rails are almost just about even. But let's pretend that they weren't and that they looked more like this. I would definitely want to cut one of these rails. So what I would do is I would take my rail nippers in here. Once again, only use your rail nippers for cutting rails. Don't use them for anything else. You don't want to dull them. And I would actually position the track here and nip off this piece so that way these two would be straight. Like I said, in this point, I don't need to do that because as I bend this piece of track back, this rail flexes and slides on the flex track and it evens itself out a little bit. But after you do that, you will get a little bit of mushrooming around the edge of the rail. You're not going to see that here, but that's where I take the jeweler's file and I file, first of all, along the front face of the rail, and then on either side, just to make sure that, gets rid of that little bit of flashing or that distortion right there. So that way, this rail will fit into a rail joiner nicely. Once again, don't force anything into a rail joiner. If it won't go, either bend the rail joiner or file down your track. Don't try to force track, especially track that you've cut, into the rail joiner. It's not going to go, and it's just going to mess up your track. Okay, now I'm actually going to try to slide some of the railroad ties in place. For this one, I think I'm going to be able to just slide this double set of ties underneath. So what I'm going to do is just dab a little bit of adhesive on there. It's probably a lot more than I need, just to get it on the underside, and then try to grip underneath and slide these into position. And remember, this is all going to dry clear, so you won't have those unsightly white lines. As you can see here, this did raise up the track slightly. However, I think it still looks pretty clean, all things considered. So this one I'm just going to leave. Now we're going to work on this joint here and do what we can about getting the ties in place over here. Okay, now unfortunately I tried sliding a set of ties under this joint here, and what it did is it ended up picking up this rail so high that I really didn't like the way it was sitting. So I'm gonna have to go with the cut method on this approach. Okay, and as you can see here, I got the first two in place. Now let's work on the last two. They don't look fantastic, but once again, I'm hoping the ballast will eventually cover all that up. Okay, and I got in the last two. This is really what eats up the time. Sometimes this can take as long as 20 minutes to do, just those 4 ties. I also went in and I took a piece of the cut off plastic, and as you can see, I cleaned up these ones a little bit. Anything you can clean up ahead of time will save you some time later with the X-Acto knife trying to clean up your rails. Okay, and now you can see here I added some weights to hold the track in place. Make sure not to put any blocks of wood on your T-pins right there, so that way you have enough of a space, so that way you're compressing the rails and not just the top of the T-pins, which is not going to hold down your rails at all. Also at this point, since I'm practically done with this section, the next step is to wait 24 hours. And also, I recommend opening up a window. The caulk has a little bit of a stronger smell, as does the solder. It does create some fumes. Okay, so thank you for watching part 3 of how I lay track on my model railroad. I did just want to mention that this might be my last video for a while. I'm going to try to finish up this whole right-hand side, minus the double crossover, but my wife and I are expecting our first child in a few weeks. We're having a little girl, and I don't really know how much time I'm going to have in order to work on the trains after she arrives. In the meantime, though, I hope everyone's safe and healthy, especially during this pandemic. And thank you very much for watching my video, and I appreciate any questions and comments. Thank you.